everybody. Welcome to the Patriot Show. I have a very special guest on my show today, Dave Hutch, a veteran member of the Parachute Regiment. He's also a friend. He has had a life less travelled, and where I come from, it takes a lot to do that. This is a gentleman who I respect immensely. Welcome to the show, Dave Hutch.
Hi, cheers, Anthony. Thanks, mate, for inviting me here, and God bless you for all the work that you and the others are doing for our vets back in the UK.
Thank you so much for that, mate. That means a lot, especially coming from yourself as well. Dave is over in the United States of America. That is where he happens to live. God bless America. I hope to join you over there very shortly. As always.
Always welcome, Anthony. You've always got a bed here, mate.
I know, mate. It's appreciated. Told you, always has been. Right. Can you tell my viewers a little bit about your background, please?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, I'm a jock. I was raised in the Highlands, and then later on, I went down to Glasgow to do an engineering course. Excuse me. And then one day in Sauchiehall Street, I saw these lads with maroon berets on and wings, and they had a little advertising pamphlet for the Parachute Regiment. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I was a bit bored and, just doing the usual drinking at the weekends and nothing much. So I joined 15 Para, which was a part-time unit, a TA unit. It's now part of 4 Para, which is part of the Parachute Regiment Reserve. So Glasgow's a totally different environment from the Highlands. I came from a very, very sleepy little village of 1,000 people, and Mrs. Mackay's cat going missing was the biggest news of the week. And then going down to Glasgow, it was a totally different world. First of all, just understanding what people were saying. Now, at first, I hated it. I hated everything about Glasgow. But over the years, as I got to know the people, how they were, it's my favourite place in the world. And I've got so many friends from Glasgow. You hear all the bad stuff about Glasgow with the violence and everything, and that is a factor. And I saw a lot of that. I lived in Sauchiehall Street for 4 years. But the people of Glasgow, they're very, very friendly people, and they've always got you back. So did 4 years in 15 Para. During that time, I had an experience that changed my life forever, and that was my first balloon jump. Now, I don't like heights as it is, and I didn't know anything about the balloon. So we're down at Bryce. It was shortly after it had moved from Abingdon, and there was a couple of lads in the cage in front of us, and one of them was a wonderful chap. He was a Royal Engineers EOD expert, and he'd been in Northern Ireland. He was highly decorated, and for whatever reason, they wanted him to do a parachuting course. I think this was round about the time when they had the incident with the QE2, and they had lads dropping in there. There was a bomb scare on board the QE2. I don't know quite what it was for. But anyway, up he goes, and he refused. Now, there's no shame in that at all, as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely none. It's a very personal thing, parachuting. So down came the cage, and I watched him get out. His face was just pure white. And I thought, hang on, this guy is a highly decorated bomb expert, and he's refused. So I was number 4 in the cage. When that thing tilted and went up, I thought I was going to fall out of the thing. I was absolutely petrified. I've been in some uncomfortable situations overseas. That was just raw fear. So anyway, up we get. Number 1 standing the door, out goes. And when that thing shook like that, I was holding on for grim death. So finally, first 3 went out, and he goes, right, number 4, come forward. Well, instead of walking across to the frame, I went round the side like this. And of course, the PGI's just looked at me, shaking his head. So I get there and I'm holding it, and just like in the Tom and Jerry cartoons, the hands were literally shaking. My knees were going like this. And I said, I don't think I can do this. He says, it's all right, son, just take a deep breath. Don't look down. So of course I looked down. I said, no, I said, there's no way I could do this. He said, look, you've come this far, just breathe. So I went like that. Now, some of them would probably have unhooked me, and that was it. This was a really good bloke. He gave me a chance. So he says, right, both hands cross your reserve, go. And I couldn't help it, and I looked down, and that was the first one. So after that, did a few dozen more, but I never got over that initial fear. I've always had that, just pure, sheer terror. So did my time with 15 Para, and then I got offered a job with a company called Cable and Wireless. Now, Cable and Wireless, quite an interesting company. It was actually owned by the British government, which few people know about. And it was originated from the Eastern Telegraph Company, which ran transatlantic cables. So what Cable and Wireless did was they provided the communications for the old British Empire. So they had places in Hong Kong with the biggest satellite facility in the world there up at Stanley, in Africa, all over South America, in the Caribbean, etc., etc. So I went down to Cornwall, did a year's training there, signed Official Secrets Act again for the second time, and went overseas. So my first posting was in Bahrain, little island in the Middle East. And at that time, there was a lot of trouble going on with Iran. The Iranian Revolution had taken place. They had the hostages. Iran was seeking to spread its influence throughout the whole of the Middle East, which of course it's still doing today. So I worked at a satellite communications facility, and that was me as a young lad there. Now, in the second part, when we talk about my back issues, look at the way that I'm standing. I didn't even know about this. One hip was much higher than the other, and that came from an accident that I'll talk about in the next part. But this was a really good lad that I was with. First thing I knew that there were problems was when two of my guys were picked up by the secret police. It was actually a Brit that ran the facility in Bahrain, and he'd worked in Kenya for a long time hunting down the Mau Mau. But this was not a good guy. I met him several times. This was a real nasty piece of work. So they whisked away two of my guys, Bahrain being a mixture of Sunni and Shia. Now, the Shia were treated horrifically. I would go into the villages and there was so much poverty and they didn't have basic necessities and things like that. So there was a lot of friction, and Iran was playing into this. So what had happened was that, and there's only a few people in the world know about this, the Iranians were going to invade Bahrain. Britain had sold them a couple of hovercraft when the Shah was in power. I think they were BH-7s. And there are a couple of hovercraft filled with Iranian Marines who were top-notch troops coming out of Bandar Abbas. Now, what had happened was they had local agents in Isa town, and they were working to do a couple of things. The moment the invasion took place, they were going to take out our communications facility. So we had satellite communications for the whole island, and some of the communications we were running were very, very important. They didn't have a submarine cable system at the time. So what had happened was they were meeting in an old building, and this would have gone ahead except for one of the locals who happened to see this candlelight going out in this old building every night. And he was wondering, why is that? It's an abandoned building. So he called the police, they arrested the conspirators, and they interrogated them. And when they get interrogated there, this wasn't TQ standing up against a wall. This was some really, really bad stuff. So anyway, the whole plan came out, and then I found out that myself and some others were on the master list to be removed. So there was key personnel that they wanted to get rid of. That came within a hair's breadth of happening. So a little while later, I'm at the satellite station, and we had a big 30-meter antenna, weighed 400 tons. So we kept getting this interference that was coming on, and it was scrambling all the communications. This was before the digital days. We were all in analog. And I was just a young engineer at the time. So they were looking at the signals on a spectrum analyzer. It's like a TV set showing signals, and they're trying to figure out what it was. I said, that's a military radar. And they all laughed, because the Earth station, Ras Abu Jarj, or it means head of the shark, was out in a stony, they call it the desert, but you know yourself, not all deserts are sand, it's sort of rocky type stuff. There was nothing there. And I kept telling them it's a military radar. So they fly all these experts out from the UK, from Raycal, and well, we think it's this, we think it's that. And this was really affecting us bad. We had people whose communications were vitally important. There was all sorts of complaints, etc., etc. So finally, one night I'm in the tea room and one of the local drivers comes in and he's, blah, 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 blah. I said, what's going on? And he says, I just saw a man popping up out of the desert. And we said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, he's in uniform. Well, it turns out that the Americans at night had dug into the ground and they had an air defense radar, which they put in there. And it was beautifully cammed up, the whole thing. And that was what was interfering with us. So that wasn't the first time that I would see what the Iranians were doing. So after Bahrain, I went home and then I went down to Falklands. So I spent a year down there. This was about a year after the war. So that was quite interesting. So went down to Bryce, stayed at the old Gateway, and it was nice to be the RAF food and not worry about having to do PLFs and things like that. So we got a VC-10 from there out to Ascension. And then it was quite an interesting flight down to the Falklands. In those days, they had what's called the air bridge. So what you did was they took a Victor tanker and she left out of Ascension to a certain staging point. And then they took a Hert tanker that had been modified by Marshals of Cambridge with a big refueling probe. She would go out and get refueled by the Victor, and the Victor would return Ascension. And then the Hert tanker would go into holding pattern. And then we took off. It was a long flight. I can't remember, maybe 12, 13 hours, something like that. But we would refuel from the Hert tanker. And the Lodi, I already knew from jumps that we'd done before. So he took me up onto the flight deck. I'll need to dig out some of the photos. And they did what was called a toboggan slide. It was quite interesting. They had like traffic lights on the back of the below the ramp, and the big drogue for fueling. And what you did was you connected and you went down at a shallow angle, and gravity would sort of put the fuel up onto there. It was a very, very skilled job. So anyway, got down to the Falklands, and I was staying at a little guest house in there, and there was absolutely nothing to do in those days. You know, nowadays they got swimming pools and satellite TV. There was absolutely nothing to do except drinking. So it was three pubs, the Rose, the Globe, and the Victory, and it was rum and coke all the time. And I get involved with these lads that were Royal Engineers posties from Mill Hill, a place called Toad Hall, and it was brilliant. So I was up there every night when I wasn't in shift, and we were just having a rare old time. And, you know, use a bit of ABI. The two guys that were with me, two civvies, they were just bored out of their mind all the time. But I went out to try and find entertainment. And that was something I had to do. And all, I've never been bored in my life. I've always found something to do. So anyway, just a quick funny story. So the bloke that ran the place was Drunken Duncan. He was a jock, ex-booty chef, and he was a brilliant guy. And the place was like Fawlty Towers. It was called Malvina's House, but not for that reason. Apparently it was named after the daughter Royal Navy captain. So Duncan was always drunk, but he was one of these guys that would try to pretend that he wasn't. He would always be swayed. He wore his beautiful white chef's uniform, and he'd forget our breakfast and lunch. Well, each week there would be a lunch between Peter de la Billier, who was in 2-2, and the RAF commander. So they'd come in, sit at a little table, and I'd be across at the far end, and they'd have a working lunch. And Duncan would come in and he'd have his whites on, and it was all done very, very formally. Well, his wife was a little lady from Devon, and she suffered terribly with Duncan. So one day, Duncan, we'd been drinking till like 4 a.m, and Duncan only had a couple of hours sleep. So he was as drunk as a skunk, and he was swaying. So he's in front of de Billier, and he says, well, good afternoon, gentlemen. To start off with lunch, we have a beautiful smoked trout. The food was really good. We got a lot of good sea trout and salmon and things like that there. and he's swaying all over the place. And then the smoke starts coming out of the kitchen, and it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker. Duncan's completely oblivious to this. And the rest of us are coughing. And he goes in for the main course. We have braised lamb. Then his wife, you hear her shouting, Duncan, Duncan, Duncan. And Duncan's paying no attention. Eventually, she sticks her head round the door and she says, the kitchen's on fire. The kitchen's on fire. And Duncan looks at the Billy and he goes, hysterical woman, pay no attention to her. So anyway, I can see flames coming out of the kitchen. So anyway, he goes, one moment, gentlemen, I'll attend to this. So out he goes, and there's shouts and screams and fire extinguishers going on. And then Duncan shouting, why didn't you tell me this before, you silly woman? And then the next minute he comes out and he's just completely covered in soot. And he says, and for dessert, we will have poached pears. So that was, that was Duncan. So we were doing a lot of work there for Biffy Sigs. Basically, they only had an old HF system there. And Britain was lacking proper satellite communications capability. That was a big problem during the Falklands War. Britain had to rely on the US for satellite reconnaissance, for intelligence from the keyhole satellites and such like. So after there, where did I go to? I went to Bermuda for 3 years. Now, why Bermuda? NASA, when they had the space shuttle program, shuttle would take off from Cape Canaveral and it would travel in this sort of a pattern like that over the Earth. And Britain has a number of very important overseas territories that happen to lie almost on the flight path. So these were Antigua in the Caribbean, Bermuda and Ascension Island. So what NASA would do was they would track the shuttle as it came over the horizon at Cooper's Island, pass the data to us, and then we would uplink it to satellite and over Earth Station in Maine, RCA domestic satellite down at Johnson Space Flight Center. So the shuttle flights were taking place regularly. And then we had the incident with the Challenger. Now, there's so much rubbish spoken on the internet about the Challenger in Columbia. It was not to do with the technology. Basically, on the shuttle, you had solid rocket boosters, which came in parts, and there were rubber O-ring seals which were in between each section. They were made by Morton Thiokol out in Utah. These were then shipped down to Kennedy Space Center. You had a big external tank containing liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. Now, there was massive pressure on NASA to show that the shuttle could be commercially successful. They had a budget, and they told NASA that they could do 2 launches. They could do a launch every 2 weeks. Now, that was extremely difficult. First of all, you would have technical issues, the weather at Cape Canaveral. You also had safety issues. You had to make sure that no ships were in the area. Then a thing not many people know about called the transoceanic abort sites. If the shuttle had problems with its engine, she would have to land. So where would she land? There was a number of places: Zaragoza in Spain, Banjul in Gambia. There was one in Morocco. There was one in Diego Garcia where I spent 3 years, and a few others. And they would send an astronaut out to each site, check the weather. So there were so many factors. We knew that they couldn't do this. But in order for NASA to get the budget, there was pressure on this. Now, the public were becoming bored with this. They would see the shuttle go up and think it was just like a bus going up into space. Anything but. This was a highly complex machine. Now, at that time, there was another factor. Ronald Reagan was the president, and he was going to give the State of the Union address. And in order to get interest back with NASA, they had what's called the Teacher in Space program. Now, Krista McCullough was selected. She was from up in New England. And the idea was that the public would see that you didn't have a test pilot up there, military personnel. This was one of us, basically, who was up there. So this was a PR campaign to get more funds for NASA, because of course voters have to vote for their congressmen and senators, who in turn vote for the budget there. So that was that. Now, one of the problems was that there had been a number of attempted liftoffs which had failed for one reason or other, technical issues. And Reagan wanted to have Krista McCullough talking from space to do a teacher's lesson for kids while he was giving the State of the Union address. Now, Morton Fire Call had not tested the O-ring seals below a certain temperature. And on that terrible day, I go over to the Astronaut Memorial each year to meet some of the NASA guys when we remember the crew who died there. It gets cold in Florida at times, and there were icicles hanging off the gantry. So this engineer, Morton Fire Call, said, we've got to scrub the launch. We've not tested below minus X degrees Celsius. Well, you had all this political pressure. You had the State of the Union address coming up. You had NASA wanting to show that it wasn't going to keep holding flights, technical problems and all that. And one of the managers greenlit the thing. So Krista McCullough phoned her mum up the night before and she says, Mom, they're going to launch no matter what. And I could go on all day about this. I know many of the engineers who were there. There's a brilliant guy called John Tribe, who's from Southampton, Tribe. You can look him up, Tribe. John was a senior engineer at NASA, worked for many, many years. Now, interesting thing about John Tribe, I met him last year having a chat with him, from Southampton. His whole street got destroyed by the V1 missiles, which were coming in, and his uncle was killed. He told me that when he worked on the Black Arrow project in Britain, went to the States to work for NASA, he's in an underground bunker at Kennedy Space Center, which is used for protection from launches. And who walks in and he's told to work with but Werner von Braun, who was the guy that designed the V1 missiles that smashed the street up. So strange old situation. So John was highly critical of the managerial decisions that took place. So this picture here shows one of the smaller satellite dishes. That's me and my dad, and our large 32-meter antenna was behind us. So this was the dish that we received NASA Select TV on. Nowadays, you can go on cable TV and you can watch it, but in those days it was restricted. So we would get live feeds from Kennedy Space Center and from the Johnson Space Flight Center, which is in Houston. So for 24 hours before a launch, we weren't allowed to touch anything. We'd spent a week checking everything, the amplifiers, transmit and receive, and most importantly, the tracking for the antenna. So you had to leave everything alone. This was a lot of work. So anyway, I'd just come on shift and we had NASA Select on, and then the Challenger lifted up. And the moment I saw those solid rocket boosters going like that, I said, that's it, that's the end of it. Now, the external tank exploded, but the shuttle itself, the orbiter, did not explode. What happened was the nose section fractured off. There was not an explosion inside the orbiter. You got the orbiter, SRBs, and the external tank. Now, those astronauts were actually alive when they hit the water. There's telemetry data passed from little pads that they have on there with, you know, heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. It was just horrific. I was absolutely stunned. It was a pivotal moment in my life, just standing there watching that. And then, of course, all hell broke loose after that. Now, the shuttle itself was a complex machine, and they had a number of modes that if you had a failure in the engines, there was a mode to try and come back to Kennedy Space Center, which is basically a big glider. Now, what's not known after that is that the first shuttle flight, which took place, they had ejection seats for the two pilots, but after that, nothing. So the US Navy Parachute Test Center at El Centro, where a lot of the Pathfinders and SF guys go to get hot weather or good weather halo training, they worked on an escape system with the shuttle. So basically, and I've got some information in this I can put on later on, basically the door would be open, there was a big pole there, and they would snap on the static line onto that, and they did multiple tests out of a C-141. The first ones were horrific. The dummies were smashing against side aircraft, but as with all that development, it eventually worked. Now, could they survive from this at some of the speeds? They said they might be unconscious, but you know, at least there was a chance of survival there. So that was one of the things. Bermuda was a very interesting place. We also had the TACAMO squadrons there. Now, what is that? It stands for Take Charge and Move Out. In the event of a nuclear war, communicating with a nuclear submarine, just the normal, is very, very difficult. And it's due to the fact that the salt water absorbs the radio waves. So I'm not going to go into some of the classified aspects of this, but it's well known and publicized that a submarine can send a buoy up and you can get information down that way, etc., etc., etc. So what they did was they took C-130s and they would go up and they would extend a cable over 1.5 miles in length, and they would do a corkscrew pattern. And when you're working at very long wavelengths, you have to have a very long antenna. So this thing would go out the back of the aircraft, and in the event of an emergency where the president had to give the command for nuclear missiles to be launched, these were some of the guys that would do that. That job has now been taken over. I think they're out at Tinker Air Force Base, and they're using converted Boeing 707s. And this is really interesting. It's called the Mercury. So this is part of the National Command Center structure in the US in the event of a nuclear war. So, one other thing about the Falklands I wanted to mention was, on the way down, the bloke that was sitting beside me was Captain Nick Barker. Now, he was the commander of HMS Endurance during the Falklands, and he was coming back down for another visit. So he was a really nice chap, old school gentleman. So I was nattering away to him. He told me something very interesting. As you know, Britain had good relationships with Argentina before the war. British naval officers came over. They trained with the army, etc., etc. It's just an awful thing that Galtieri did what he did there, and we'll not go into that. But he told me he got a letter from an Argentine captain after the war, and he says, "Dear Captain Barker, we met at a command course in, I can't remember if it was Dartmouth in the UK, one of the Royal Navy facilities." So Nick Barker wrote back to him and he said, "Oh, yes, yes, I remember you." And the next letter came back, said, "Did you know I had you in my sights?" And they were going to blow up the Endurance. And he had one of those little intelligence logbooks that you get in ships, which has foreign ships and who the captain was. And that was the only thing that stopped him from firing. So that was quite interesting, a very, very interesting guy there. So after that, I went to North Yemen, which was spent a year there. That was someplace that. So I was based in Sana'a, and which is the capital. It's as dry and dusty as anything. Now, at that time, there's North and South Yemen. Basically, what was happening was that they had infiltrators coming up from South Yemen, and they were planting bombs in the city. There was all sorts of really bad stuff going on. And Russia and America were trying to curry favor with the leader. Now, the leader was a dictator. He was called Ali Abdul Saleh, and this was, I met him. He's a really rough guy. He had that whole country with a grip, but he was quite clever. So they had a F-5 Freedom Fighters, the jets, and I used to go drinking with the American pilots there who were training the Yemenis. So he was getting all this for free. And then they had Russian Spetsnaz. So they were training the Yemeni airborne. They had some old Antonovs there, which they were training them from. So what you had was contact reports, which they used to have in Berlin, that if you came across someone from the Eastern Bloc, you had to write up this report and blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the issues was there was only one little supermarket, and it was an awful place. It was just fly blown, and I lived off Aussie processed cheese and grilled chicken there. It was the only thing you could get, make myself curries and stuff like that. Well, you had two little aisles, and you would have the Americans down one aisle and the Russian Spetsnaz down the other with their little trolleys getting their goodies, and it was the only place where they didn't have to put a contact report in there. So he would travel in convoys, Ali Abdul Saleh, and each vehicle would have they call it a cattle catcher in the States. It's one of those things the trains used to use to knock cattle off the tracks. If anyone was in his way, that thing would just come and hit them, and they would just go off inside the road, and people killed and everything. So I had an old Toyota, a green Toyota. It was like something out of Fred Flintstone. There was a hole in the floor that you could look through, and I had a wonderful old Yemeni, they call him a houseboy. The guy was in his 70s, but he looked after me, he did the cooking and the cleaning, and he'd worked in the sergeant's mess in Aden, and his English was pretty good. And the first night I was there, he said, "Where are you from, sir?" I said, "Well, I'm from Scotland." "Oh, I know them in Aden. Much drinking, much fighting." I said, "Yeah, that sounds pretty much so." So he was a wonderful old guy, but it was a rough old place. And the accommodation I was in, they put me across the road, and this was deliberate by the Yemenis, from the secret police headquarters. It was built like a big fort. And every night you could hear the screams coming from there. People were brutally tortured, and it was the Russians that were in charge of that. And then you would see each day a mill helicopter would come in, they would take the bodies, and then they would dump them in the hills. So each day I would go out for a run, and because keeping myself fit overseas was absolutely vitally important. There was so much disease there. 5 of the lads came down with severe hepatitis, but I was very, very careful, always washing my hands, washing this, washing that. And one of the blokes in the guard tower, he would see me run each day, and he'd point the AK and he would shout, "Bang, bang, mister, bang, bang." You know, and I'm looking at him like that. And then one day I heard when I left, there was another lad that took the place, and the guy did squeeze the trigger, and that ended up very badly. So after that, where did I go to? I went down to Belize. So we were upgrading a satellite communication system down there. Now, there was a lot going on there at the time. Guatemalan special forces were doing incursions through the jungle almost daily. So we were talking to the Harrier pilots there, which was it Lookout Camp? Can't remember. It was one down by the airport anyway. And what they would do is they would come in low level, because you could listen in on the radio and you could hear them chattering away. So they used direction find and find out where they were, and there was also stuff up in orbit that was helping with that as well. And then the Harriers would just come in low level and fire bursts into the treetop canopy, and that helped. A lot of the soldiers who were in Belize, they didn't realize what was happening around them. The Cubans were operating in that area. La Dirección de Inteligencia Cubana, which is the Cuban intelligence agency, one of the most dangerous in the world. Now, they've been added on to the terrorist list, and people are going, "Well, what's Cuba got to do with terrorism?" Plenty. What they do is they're intelligence brokers. This is how they get money in the country. They've been doing this for decades. They are probably, along with Mossad and with the old Stasi, the most efficient intelligence agency in the world. They've got operatives all around the world, and they pick up information and they sell it to the highest broker. Now, they've been working with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, etc., etc. So during that time when I was in Belize, you had Nicaragua and El Salvador, and you had a lot of fighting going on. The Contras, which Spanish word meaning against, were fighting against the Sandinista government there. And there was massive human rights abuses in El Salvador, etc., etc. I won't go into too many details, but the US was very, very concerned with communist influence there. Now, British squaddies were basically unaware of, in many cases, of what was going on there. You know, Belize is an interesting place. I mean, you've got Orange Walk, you've got some beautiful places there, Pine Walk with forests and everything. Belize City was horrific at the time. That was a real, real dangerous place. They would stab you as soon as they look at you. But when you got out and you went into places like Belmopan, which is a little sleepy one-horse town, they're really, really nice people. But Belize was strategically important, and also from the drugs point of view, which I'll talk about later on. So you had a lot of stuff going on there, and one of the concerns was the Guatemalan military. They were a right-wing military. This wasn't like one of the left-wing groups that were on there, but this was actually quite serious, and we all know who was working down there, etc., etc. So after that, where did I go to? Okay, I went to Diego Garcia, which is a big military base in the Indian Ocean. So I spent 3 years there. I had a lot of Royal Marines there, some good lads with some good sessions. I can't talk too much about it, but one of the incidents that happened there was we used to take on leave a C-141 from US Air Force and fly into Singapore, into Paya Lebar Air Base. So after that incident with a balloon, I said to myself, that is the worst fear that I've ever had. It was almost primeval. I'm not joking, Anthony. I nearly fainted. I've never known fear like that in my life, ever. I said, nothing's going to bother me from now on. So the C-141, there'd be a bunch of people, civilian and military, take off from Diego, go to Paya Lebar. Well, I'd been out with the lads having a real heavy session the night before, a place called the Stables. And I was sleeping, and the next minute I hear the siren going on, and the plane's doing a nosedive. And there was all sorts of screaming and shouting, and there was a few US Navy girls there, and they're all, ah! Well, I thought, that's it, you know, my moment's come. So I just sat there. What had happened was they'd had a massive decompression in the aircraft, and the pilot, quite rightly, he just put the plane down in a dive to try and get down in an area where there was more oxygen coming in. So I saw how people react when they think that that's the end of it. And some people who, I won't mention any names, but who were quite full of swaggering and I'm this, that. Well, there was all sorts of tears and things going on there. So that was Diego. The next one that I went to, which was my last posting with Cable and Wireless, was down in Grand Turk. Now, Turks and Caicos are a chain of islands. It's a British territory down in the Caribbean. Grand Turk, there's nothing much goes on there. Just a load of donkeys floating around and a few bits and pieces. It was actually near where John Glenn splashed down, so NASA had a tracking station there, which is one of the reasons that we were involved there. Now, at that time, Pablo Escobar, it was running the Medellin cartel. Things were really, really bad. There was two issues. Number one, the amount of drugs that were getting into the US via the Caribbean, because the aircraft in those days had to refuel. So one of Escobar's buddies had a K in the Bahamas, which he bought. Corrupt officials of the Bahamian government were involved. There's an excellent series called Narcos, Narcotraficantes, on Netflix. It's one, I've watched all these shows. It's one of the few ones that really show what happened. And these were extremely brave guys in those days, extremely, because in those days, they didn't have the non-kill order against DE agents. It was only when Kiki Camarena was killed, Enrique Camarena, that took place, and they left them alone. So during that time,
very, very quickly, because I think we should have a break for a couple
sure.
of minutes, and then we're going to go on to part two. All right.
Sure.
You can stay on the line, please.
Yes.
Everybody out there, go and grab yourself a quick cup of tea or whatever, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Thank you for watching. Speak to you in a second. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Patriot Show. This is part 2 of my friend's story, and I'm going to straight back to Dave about all Pablo Escobar. Hi, Dave.
Right. Cheers, Anthony. So as I was saying, I was working in the Caribbean in Grand Turk and the Turks and Caicos. Now, there was a lot going on at that time. Pablo Escobar had risen in Medellin from small-scale crime work into major organized drug work. Now, people talk about him on one side as a Robin Hood, one of the most evil people that ever lived. The truth is a little bit in between. There's no doubt about it. This was a really, really bad individual. He committed horrific acts. The taking down of the Avianca airliner, where a politician was supposedly on board who was involved with extradition to the United States. Bad, bad, bad. But at the beginning, one of the things that he did not like in Colombia is a beautiful country, and there's some of the most friendly people in South America. Nowadays, things are much better. The fighting with the FARC has reduced. Cartagena, which is on the coast, beautiful Spanish architecture, etc., etc. Those people deserve peace. Now, Escobar, what he would do is, in Medellin, it's got multiple areas called barrios, which are slums up on the side of hills. The people were living in garbage dumps and rubbish dumps. There was a very wealthy elite in the city, and the poor were really, really poor. So he capitalized on that. What he did was he got soccer teams, football teams, and he would have land, he would put houses on there, he would help the people. So they adored him, they called him a Robin Hood. And in those sort of places, it's very easy to pay young kids to act as lookouts. So that's what you had. You had lookouts all over the city, they had radios, it was all very well organized. Now, what he was doing was he was flooding the US market with cocaine. Now, how did all this start? Well, one of the worst places was a place called Studio 54 in New York, which was a very well-known nightclub, and you had all Bianca Jagger, Mick Jagger, Andy Warhol, all these people going there. Cocaine was just coming on the scene. And the police in New York, because at that time it was disastrous, Times Square, there was so much crime there before Giuliani cleared it up, they didn't really pay much attention to cocaine. They thought it was just like, well, you know, this is just like a little bit more than marijuana, but it wasn't. So a sort of a blind eye was turned to this. And that gave him confidence. So he started putting more and more drugs in the United States. Now, the violence that occurred was not directly due to him. It was due to a woman called Giselda Blanco. She was called the White Widow. This was a really bad piece of work. She was the one that started off the sicarios, which means basically hitman or assassin on motorbikes. Now, she was in Miami. And this was an extremely ruthless woman. Jennifer Lopez is doing a movie about her just now. So she was one of the main distributors for Escobar in Miami. And she would take down any other rival gang violently. And what happened was it was called the Dadeland Mall Massacre. This was like a gunfight at the OK Corral, where some of her guys in a rented van just popped out with automatic weapons. They had the walls of the vehicle lined with all sorts of weapons. You can see it in YouTube. And there was a massive gun battle right in a commercial mall. So that was the final straw. So President Reagan declared a state of emergency for Florida. National Guard went in, the DA was bumped up, etc., etc. So how were the drugs getting into the United States? Well, in those days, the Mexican connection hadn't really been brought up, and I'll talk more about that later on. That only happened after the Medellin, Cali, and Valle del Norte cartels had been knocked down. Mexico used to be a really peaceful place. I'll speak more about that later on. So what would happen is you would have light aircraft coming from Colombia and Venezuela. The Venezuelan government's heavily involved in drug trafficking these days. I'll speak more about that later on. But anyway, they would come down, they would need to refuel. So they would go to a place called Norman's Cay in the Bahamas, which was owned by a buddy of Escobar's. And this place was like a playground for all these narcos. They bribed the Bahamian government. We knew all about this. So South Caicos is just basically scrubland. The chief minister there was called Norman Saunders, and he had arranged for aircraft to come in, get refueled in South Caicos. Air traffic control guys were involved, the customs guys were all getting paid off, take off, and then what they would do is one of two things. Not many people know about this, but a lot of these flights would go directly to Lakeland in Florida, which is just down the road from us, and they would land there. Otherwise, what they would do is they would fly low level. All these guys were ex-NAM pilots, and they would just bung the drugs out of the aircraft, and then these cigarette boats would come out and start to pick them up. Now, later on, there were two things that occurred. The DA started to use E-2C Hawkeye aircraft, which is an airborne early warning system, and they would be able to look down and see a lot of these aircraft and vessels. The other thing was the Caribbean Basin Radar Network, which was a whole series of radar stations linked up by satellite that went all the way down there. So anyway, Saunders was deeply corrupt and getting a lot of money. So there's a guy called Barry Seal. Tom Cruise made a movie about him called American Made. Now, Barry Seal was an ex-Green Beret. He was a pilot. He was flying drugs, got caught by the DA, and he was told, you help us out, and we'll see what we can do about your sentencing. Now, most people think that the first foreign head of state to be arrested by the US was Manuel Noriega. It wasn't. It was actually Norman Saunders. So what they did was they had a sting operation in a little hotel in Miami. Barry Seal, who was a larger-than-life character, was in there with Saunders. The DA's next door. They got the cameras going. But Barry Seal had to give a sign when Saunders was at the point of seeing something that he could be arrested for, because I'd be very careful with this. You know, this is basically a foreign leader on US soil. So when Saunders finally agreed on the money that was going to be transferred, Barry Seal said, you know what my name is? It's Seal, a performing seal. And he went, clap, clap. And that was it. So Saunders got arrested. And this was a huge embarrassment to the British government. And I won't go into too much about that. But in a lot of these places, it was old doddery governors that would pop down. You know, I did a lot of work in different British territories throughout the world. And it'd be some guy from the Foreign Office, and the governor would come down, and they would have the feathered hat and things like that, all this sort of stuff. They really hadn't a clue about what was going on there. So all this trouble that was going on in Miami, the planes flying, getting refueled, coming in Lakeland, and then dropping them off down by the Florida Keys. So a lot of this stuff was going on. Then I was at home. I had a little bit of accommodation just down from the airport. And this is a sleepy little one-horse town, Grand Turk. There's another larger line called Providencial. It's really beautiful, which was further away. And one of my mates, I'll call him G, he was a jock lad, worked for customs. He's down at the airport. So at the weekend, there was nothing happening. You get the odd plane come in, but nothing really very much. Well, this aircraft comes in that's got problems. And I get this call. And I get told that one of Pablo Escobar's top lieutenants has just been arrested at the airport. Well, I live right down from the airport. So what had happened was this guy had come in a light aircraft, and he didn't want to land Grand Turk. He wanted to land elsewhere, but he had engine problems. So Gordon's at the little customs place, a little shack. And this is all before the internet and all this sort of carry on. They had a fax line that connected to MacDill Air Force Base, which is just outside Tampa. And that's where CENTCOM is. So that's where a lot of the special ops operations overseas are actually controlled from. So I know a lot of guys from there, and I'll talk more about that in the next part about back injuries, because a lot of the SEALs that worked there had some very, very bad injuries, and they got helped with some of the techniques that worked on me. So anyway, well, I've lost my train of thought there. What was I on about, Anthony?
I just want to say as well, the reason, to message from your viewers, the reason why Dave can't look directly at the camera on that angle is he's got an injury.
Yeah.
I just wanted people to understand that. And this
Yeah.
is, he feels more comfortable in that position. Obviously,
Thanks, Anthony.
camera there as well. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah,
We're
thank
talking about Pablo
Yeah.
Lieutenant
Right,
being pulled
exactly.
at the
So,
airport.
yeah. I'm sorry about this, guys, but I got a truck rammed into my Jeep a few years ago, and I'm still getting treated for this. So, anyway, what had happened was the guy arrives at the little airport, and there was a fax line that went to McDill. So everyone that arrived had to take your passport, put it in the fax machine, they'd send it to McDill. DA guys would have a look. So Gordon gets this urgent message coming back in the fax machine saying you have to apprehend this guy. He is wanted. Now, it turns out, I can't say too much about this, but this is a really unknown character. His pseudonym was Robert Serry, and he claimed to be French, but he was a guy behind the scenes that didn't show up much. Everyone knows about the Ochoa brothers and all the rest of them. They were all flamboyant. The guy that ran Norman's Key, he wasn't. This guy, and he was a really bad individual. I'll talk more about later on. So poor Gordon, he's this UK customs guy. By this time, Serry looks at him and he knows what's happening. He's seen the facts come through. He says, so you know who I am. And Gordon says, well, he said, now, my aircraft, we're not going to get this fixed. I need the keys to one of these planes here. And Gordon said, and he was truthful, he says, well, I don't have the keys. They take that off of them. There's only a handful of aircraft there. He said, well, we're in a bit of a predicament. How am I going to get out of here? And Gordon says, well, I don't know. He says, have you got family? And of course, Gordon was immediately chilled by that. And he said, well, it looks like we're in a bit of a situation. At that point, the police showed up. Now, there was only a few of these lads. This is just a small local police force. And they were getting trained by a guy called Elmore Davis, who we'll talk about later on. If anyone's watched Line of Duty, then he was one of the characters this was based on. So they show up. Now they just show up by chance. They're going to get something from them. But Serry thinks they've come to arrest him. So Gordon doesn't really know what to do. So the police come up and they start asking about something that was going on. And another fax comes through and says, you've got to apprehend him now. So Gordon turns around and says, we have to arrest you. And they arrested the guy. So he gets taken to a tiny little local jail there. And we thought, right, that's that. While later, all hell breaks loose. He's escaped from the jail. And this is a tiny little island. There's salinas, salt pans there. It's all scrubland, donkeys floating about and things like that. So some American Special Forces guys arrive from McDill. C-130 comes in. They're all over the island. They're searching for this guy. They cannot find him. Finally, they get him in the loft of a house. Now, it gets pretty hot there. I think the temperature is about 130 degrees and he's unconscious. They grab him, put him in an APC, into the back of the Herc, gone. Now, at that point, I'd met my wife, Pam, in Tampa. I used to fly into Tampa for business and down to Miami. I met her there, and she worked for the St. Petersburg Times. So I asked Pam to make some inquiries about this guy because he'd been flown back there. That was the last we ever heard of it. So he obviously got put into the witness protection program there. So that was basic about that. Now, Ellie Davis, okay. So because of the scandals with drugs and the Norman Saunders getting arrested and everything, the British government decided they would try and clean some stuff up. So they sent down a guy from Liverpool police called Elmore Davies, Ellie Davis, larger-than-life character. He was actually a friend of mine, even though we weren't doing the same thing. I was in the communications side. Small island, I would meet him for lunch every day. It was a little outside cafe called Xavier's Place. We'd just have a few wets and a sandwich. And he was a funny, funny guy. He was typical Scouser, very sharp-witted, real funny. He would just tell me all these stories like they had a horse on the island and it was wandering around and it had collapsed. So some old lady, there's a lot of these old expats there, all eccentric old expats. Some old lady phoned up and said, the horse is dying. I need you to come out and, do something humane for it. So Ellie said, right. So there was an old pistol that was lying there. All of the weapons were just all old and rusty, and he was trying to get them cleaned up, and some old ammunition. So he said he went out the beach, and there's a poor old horse, and he says, right, Robin, sorry about this, mate. And he squeezed the trigger, and because the ammunition was so rotten, the bullet just sort of fell out the pistol and landed down at his feet like something out of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. And then the horse got up and shook its head and just ran off. So he was always telling us funny stories, and I got on great with the guy. Well, cut forward, many years later, I'm in Africa, I'm coming back home, stop off at Heathrow Airport for the night before I fly back to Florida. Pure chance, put on the TV, and it says Detective Elmore Davis has been arrested in one of the biggest drug scandals in British history. I was stunned. I immediately get in the phone Pam up and says, Pam, listen to this. What he had done he'd worked with a guy called Curtis Warren, who was probably the biggest drug dealer in Europe. He was a real bad individual. And he was basically warning him about drugs raids against him. And the Colombians were involved in all of this and things. That was a huge punch for me. I had trusted this guy, we had shared information, and then just seeing this really, really bad. So if anyone watches Line of Duty, there's a Sun article about this. Some of these characters were based on real life people, and the organised crime gang, which was run by Curtis Warren, Ellie Davis was one of those guys there. So after that, I went to States, got married to Pam, and we lived in a little place called Melbourne in Florida. It's a real nice place, just down the road from Kennedy Space Centre. So at that point, this was a picture here. This was taken for posterity in Grand Turk. That's just after I was told about Seri being arrested, and one of my mates who was in the house, he took that for posterity. That was just heading off to a meeting to discuss what was going on. Oh, one last thing about that, they had his trial in Grand Turk. Now, they brought in two witnesses, two extremely brave people. One was his ex-girlfriend. Now, she had been beaten up badly by him. It was really bizarre. There was a little bar called the Salt Raker Inn, and it was right down by the water, and you could just sit there and have a couple of wets. And the beach was close by. If a Zodiac had been brought in with the Colombians, it could have wiped out all these witnesses in one go. But anyway, so she was sitting there and we were talking to her, and he had beaten her really badly. So she was going to go in open court and testify. But the other guy was there, and I'm not going to mention his name. He was a tiny little bloke. He was a DA pilot who'd flown undercover for the Medellin cartel for many years, flying DC-3s and all sorts. I think he's written a book. I need to look back up on the guy there. But what he did was, this was the bravery of some of these guys. Joe Toft ran the DA office in Medellin. And in those days, DA agents were open range. It was only after Kiki Camarena was killed and the resultant hammering by the DA, these guys were risking their lives all the time. An amazing guy. And the stuff he was telling me about what Escobar was doing, horrible, horrifically torturing people and things like that. Escobar was not a hero. He was a real bad individual. So anyway, that was basically that. So in Florida, I then started going out on the contract circuit, doing civilian work, governmental work, all in satellite communications. So I worked in China, Taiwan, Indonesia, South Korea, etc. This was in Seoul, in South Korea. We went up and did a job on the Chinese-North Korean border. That was a very strange one. I can't talk too much about that, but that was a joint Chinese-South Korean project. You would find it very interesting, some of the joint projects, which I'll talk about later on, joint US-Pakistani project that I went on, and a joint US-Russian one that ended up very, very badly indeed. So next thing that happened was I got a phone call to say, can you and another British guy, called Brian Corcoran, ex-Royal SIGs, go to Tajikistan and put in satellite communication system with video? I thought, where the hell's that? Well, found out later on, you've got Afghanistan, you've got Tajikistan. Half the Afghans are of Tajik descent. Now, this might be interesting to anyone who has fought in Afghanistan. How did all this stuff start off? Why did the Russians get involved? Basically, what had happened was there was a communist takeover in Afghanistan, and two hardliners had opposition to each other. There was fighting going on. Now, up until that point, I don't know if many people know this, but Afghanistan was a very peaceful place. Women would go to work, they'd be wearing miniskirts, go-go boots, there was bars open, there's some photos available on the internet, and there's a British chap who I think he was a politician, he was a hippie, he did a really brilliant documentary in Afghanistan. He'd actually walked through there, him and his mum. It was totally different from what we see now. So what happened was when the communist hardliners came in, and this was the same problem in Iran with the Shah, they clamped down on religion. Now, we're not talking about extremism. One of the ways extremism occurred was because they clamped down on it completely. They were hammering the imams and torturing them because communism, of course, was completely opposite to Islam there. Now, these guys weren't running around chopping people's heads off and, you know, making women wear this, that, and the next thing. They were in the mosques and they were just saying, we don't like the regime. So they clamped down on them. That did not go down well. And that was one of the first things that caused this religious extremism to take place. And I'll talk more about Iran later on. That's a beautiful country, wonderful people. It's the regime, not the people, are some of the friendliest on the planet. It's embarrassing that the hospitality that you get from them, but that's a separate issue. What happened was, with the conflict that was going on between these rival communist groups, and now the religious leaders starting to rise up and say, we don't want this, communism's against our religion, they asked the Russians to come in. Now, most people think that the Russians just, yeah, we'll come in there and we'll do this. They didn't want to come in. The Russian foreign minister, I can't remember if it was Gromyko at the time, he wrote this brilliant essay, which he gave to, who was in charge at the time? I can't remember if it was, I can't remember who the Russian, Brezhnev or whoever. But basically it said, we will get ourselves caught in a religious war here. Don't go in. Now, those were very wise words, and this was a long, long time ago, 70s. But the problem was Afghanistan was now a communist country. It was a satellite of Russia. They felt that if they didn't step in and help them, then other countries would start to feel bad against Russia. So they did not want to go in. I spoke to a lot of Afghan vets later on when I did this joint Russian-US project. They did not want to go in, but they went in. What happened, happened. Now, what should have done at that point was the West should have let them be. They should have let them be. Let the Russians do what they were doing, fighting with the Mujahideen, whatever. But you've got to remember, Ronald Reagan was in charge. He was vehemently anti-communist. They wanted to teach the Russians a lesson. The Vietnam War obviously had not gone well, and they wanted to give the Russians their own Vietnam War. Now, one of the individuals in this was a Texas socialite of all people called Joanne Herring. Joanne Herring was a very wealthy woman in Texas, had connections to US presidents, but more importantly to General Zia al-Haq, who was later assassinated that blew up his C-130. She was very close to him. And she said, we want to find a way to help the Mujahideen. Now, this is well before bin Laden and everything, all that, even though bin Laden was operating there. Basically, the West trained him, showed him what to do, gave him weapons. So what she did was she got an American senator called Charlie Wilson, a congressman. And there was a movie with Tom Hanks called Charlie Wilson's War, and they made it out, oh, it was all wonderful. No, that was one of the biggest mistakes. They worked with certain agencies in the UK and the US, and they formed the pipeline in Afghanistan. And this was basically where weapons and certain individuals would go in, train the Mujahideen, and start giving them techniques to fight against the Russians. Now, one of the things that they brought in was the Stinger missile. The Russians would use Hein gunships to come in. They would saturate an area. Before that, they'd use Su-25 frog foots to come in. I spoke to some of the pilots. They would zap the area and then drop Spetsnaz paratroopers in. It was horrific fighting. Those pilots, when I was in Tajikistan later on, they always had a live grenade. If they were caught by the Mujahideen, they'd be literally skinned alive and they'd be put in a spit and roasted. It was horrific. Really, really bad stuff went on. So the Stingers were only one thing that helped stop that war. But that was how a lot of that stuff actually started there. So anyway, after the defeat of the Soviets, the Mujahideen wanted to spread jihad all through Central Asia and then into Europe. Now, this is way back. This is the late 90s. So how did they want to do that? They wanted to cause trouble in Tajikistan, which they did, and then go through all the other stands, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc., etc. This was a master plan. There was a brutal Tajik civil war where basically insurgents who'd come from Afghanistan were stirring all of this up, trying to cause a civil war. Now, the Russians had been defeated. They had border guards all along the Panj River, which separates Tajikistan from Afghanistan up by the Hindu Kush. Now, no one was helping them. And at that time, not much in the internet, there was nothing known about this really brutal civil war. So I go to Frankfurt Airport, I pick this lad up, Brian, we go to Moscow, and we were supposed to go to Dushanbe for a little while. There was an Intersputnik satellite station out there, put the hub equipment in, fly from there to Korog, go to a Russian forward operating base, do some work there with a smaller antenna, go home. And that was it. So on the plane from Frankfurt to, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Sheremetyevo or Domodedovo, I can't remember which one we're going into, but I pick up the International Herald Tribune and it says that a bunch of peacekeepers had been taken hostage in Tajikistan. So I says, we need to find more about this. So we get in and I go straight to the British Embassy. So British Embassy tell us under no circumstances go there. They're telling you the civil war has stopped. It's not. We're actually pulling embassy staff out of Dushanbe. Do not go there. Okay, fair enough. We then go to the local Moscow headquarters of a certain very, very well-known company who do work for a certain very well-known entity, shall we say. Right, that's all I'm going to say about that. So there's a Russian guy in charge, very, very articulate guy, PhD, extremely ruthless. So we go in, and I'll just call him F. So I go in and I said, Dr. F, we've been to the British Embassy, we can't go there. They're advising us. And because in those days, they didn't have proper insurance for you. I thought, if anything happens to me, what's going to happen to Pam? You know, nowadays, of course, you can take out danger insurance and all sorts of stuff. In those days, there was nothing, you know. So I said, you know, once this is cleared down, we'll see what happens. No, he says, you must go there. Now, we didn't know at the time that the president was going to talk to some of these remote villages. These were the ones that were turning towards these, they didn't call them jihadists in those days, but that's basically what they were. There was other stuff. This project was absolutely vital, but we hadn't been told that. We had not been told how important this thing was and how bad the situation still was. He says, you will go there. I says, I'm not going there. That's it. End of story. No use arguing. He said, can I speak to you in private? So Brian goes outside. He was a British citizen. He was living in the UK doing contract work. He pulls out all of these documents, and it is every single passport stamp I've ever had, every job that I've had. Now, most of my work was civilian-related stuff, doing stuff for satellite TV stations and sports companies and things like that. I did the link for President Clinton's visit to Nigeria, stuff like that. But some of it was government related, and some of it was highly sensitive, and he had all of that. So I just moved to the States. I just got married to Pam. I was waiting for my green card to come through. I had temporary documentation, and where I was, the work that I would be doing in the future was more government related than civilian. So that aspect was very important to me. That was my bread and butter. It wasn't like cable and wireless where I had a salary each week and all your benefits and everything like that. That was my livelihood, and I was just starting in the States. He told me quite clearly, if you don't go there, I'll have you blacklisted from every company. Now, without going into details, I knew this guy wasn't joking. This wasn't an idle threat. He knew more about me than even my family or a lot of my employers had before. So I get a hold of Brian outside, and I didn't want to tell him this at the time because I got warned. He says, if you talk about this to the other one, then I'll make sure that when you get back, you're just not going to get jobs. So I spoke to Brian and I said, look, he wants us to go on this job. So Brian was really concerned. We then start talking to people from a certain entity who knew about the place. He says, you do not want to go there. He says, it's really bad. It's just chaos at the present moment. So Brian said, I'm going home. And if there was a huge shouting match, and Brian basically just said, beep you. So now I don't have Brian. I said, I cannot go there on my own. I can't do this myself. So they got this young kid, Nikolai. Now, Nikolai had fought in Afghanistan, young Russian lad, really, really nice fella. He was already nervous. And I said, well, when do we go? And so this guy goes, oh, don't you worry. We've got this guy called Shavkat Kalyov. Now, I'll talk more about this character. I'll put this up properly later on. Businessman in Tajikistan, highly educated, lived in San Diego. He knew Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac, lived in his house, rented that out there, knew this one, knew that one. You know yourself, Anth, in these areas, there's some very charming, highly intelligent, highly dangerous people. They're not all running around, you know, with the beards and everything like that, and some of them are more dangerous than the Bulging Eye Brigade. So anyway, we get into Dushanbe, and he's all very friendly and all my good friends, and you know, we were drinking, which was surprising me, and a lot of the guys there are Russian descent, so everything was so I was starting to feel a little bit better. Then he says, right, there's a satellite station outside of Dushanbe. It's an Intersputnik system. We've got Intelsat in the West, they get Intersputnik. So you go there, you put the hub equipment in, get that done. Day later, you'll be flying up to Korog, from there to the FOB, put the small antenna into the system. So now it's sounding quite good. Maybe get the hub in a day, fly up there, get the dish in, you know, pour the concrete, get the dish in, connect everything up, back, maybe a couple of days. Okay. So we get in these crappy old cars. You know how it is in those places. The taxis are all falling to bits, doors hanging out. And we're going at breakneck speed up this road outside Dushanbe. And I said, can you slow down, mate? I mean, bloody hell, you know, we're going around corners like this. As we get in the satellite station, I see this vehicle at the side of the road, a taxi, and it's smoke burning from it, and there's a couple of bodies in there, and this has obviously just happened. I said, what the hell happened there? And they go, oh, traffic accident. So anyway, we get to the station, start putting the stuff in. As it's getting dark, the taxi driver comes in, and he's blah, 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 like that. And the guy with me says, we need to go now. So we're zooming down the road, and now I see two other vehicles which are on fire at the side of the road. And they've obviously been hit by an RPG or something like that. So we get back into Dushanbe, and I meet with Kalyov, and I say, there's still fighting going on here. And he goes, no, this is gangs here and all this sort of BS. So the next day we go out to Dushanbe Airport, and that's split into two parts. There's a civvy section where we get these old Tupolev Tu-154s to Tajik, and then the Russian military section. So I'm talking to a couple of these guys. I've got two Spetsnaz guys who are going to be with us, and then they've got the helicopter crew, and it's a big Mil-26. It's this massive, massive chopper. So we're about to get on board that, and then I hear this right above our heads. and it's two Su-25 Frogfoot ground attack aircraft, and these things just shot right over us. So they come up, they do a bank, and there's hills outside Dushanbe. You can call them mountains, they're not that big. And the next minute, they go in for a gun run, and there's tracer coming up from the ground, and they start blasting this site with cannon. So it's obvious that there's still fighting going on. So I said to the guy, there's no way I'm getting inside this thing. I'm not. That's it. If I'm going to lose my job, that is it. So they're shouting. And these Russians are big. I'm a big lad. I'm 6'2". But some of these Russians are they're like mountains. So I've got this guy right up in my face like this. And I says, what are you going to do? I says, you drag me on that thing. I'm not going to set that kit up. So there's all sorts of shouting, and then he starts pushing you, and I says, get your hands off me. So this is out in the middle of this runway. So anyway, the next minute, a Russian mechanic comes over, blah, blah, blah. Turns out there's a mechanical fault, as happens with all this Russian kit. So I thought, right, good. That's that. Next minute comes trundling down an old Antonov, 28 or 26, got the tail ramp down. And they said, right, we're going up on that. And I was just so knackered. I said, right, let's just get this over and done with. So we get into the thing, and it's all Russian squaddies. And these poor lads, they get treated like awful by the NCOs. This was when conscription's still there. So we get in the aircraft, and we're flying high over Tajikistan. It's one of the most beautiful countries on the planet, just the mountains, the snow, all these valleys, So I was starting to relax a bit. And the next minute, this klaxon goes off, whoop, 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 and the aircraft just starts banking like this. And then I start seeing flares going out all over the place. And the Russians, a lot of them are Christians, of course, they're crossing themselves, and it's just complete chaos in the aircraft, and there's kit falling all over the place. It hasn't been tied down properly. So I say, Nikolai's as white as a sheet, and I say, what's going on? So he speaks to the Lodi, and he says, well, tell the British guy it was just a test, but Nikolai says they had a lock-on from a surface-to-air missile there, and that's what that was. So anyway, okay, that's over and done with. So we land at Korog, get out, it's a little small town right on the border area there, nothing of much. And they have a customs stand set up, insane. And this huge Tajik, he says, passport. So I take out my passport, and I had a number of passports. Some of the Arab countries, if you get an Israeli stamp in there, you can't get in, and all this sort of stuff. And I had already gone through 4 passports that were just jam-packed full. So I give it to him, and I'm expecting he's just going to look quickly. And out of nowhere, he says, "You're a British spy." And I laughed. I said, "What are you on about?" 2 guys grabbed me, and they take me around the back of the shed, and they've got AKs, and one of them's babbling away, and Nikolai's almost in tears, and he says, "You're going to be shot." And then they all burst out laughing. And then, my good friends, we are only jokings. So, that wasn't a very good start to that. So next thing, we have to go and see what the Russians are doing. So at that time, the Afghans were coming down these sheer mountainsides with donkeys. I mean, it's unbelievable what they were doing. Literally right down like that. The Russians were protecting the area against jihadists, but at the same time, they were letting drugs through. This was a huge thing. They'd let the drugs in, take them from Korog to Dushanbe, fly them from there to Moscow, and then from Moscow they would go to Amsterdam. So a lot of this was going on, and I'll talk later on about how all of these groups, the Taliban, etc., they all make so much money from drugs there. So the Russian squad is
in for a second, just for a second here.
Sure.
Because we're at the 40-minute point, and I think some people would like to grab another cup of tea or something a little bit.
Sure, Anthony, yeah.
I actually know what's going to come, so I'm going to say we are going to have part 3 of this, and it will be in about a week's time. I want to give
sure.
time to digest in what we're talking about.
I hope I'm not boring you to death here with all this stuff.
I think everyone's going to find it interesting.
Okay.
Tajikistan, I've spent a lot of time there with with certain government officials. So some of the photographs and stories that are going to come in part 3 are going to be interesting.
Okay, right.
Okay, buddy. Right, I'd like to say, Dave, if you can stay on the line for a couple of minutes.
Sure, mate, yeah.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for watching this. Hope it was educational. And yeah, it's another exclusive on the Patriot Show. Thank you for everyone watching. As always, stay safe. Catch you next time.